Well, hello and welcome everybody. My name is Jeff Clark. I'm here from the Aging Division. I work in the Community Living section as a program manager. Today I'm here to talk to you about certain components of the Wyoming Senior Services Board that include the grant applications and reporting requirements for the WSSB. A few of the objectives that we're going to cover today are the differences between the basic and the formula grants, how to determine the amounts of the grant awards that each senior center receives, what makes a senior center eligible to receive funds from the WSSB, and how all of those components come together to make the final grant award for each center. Along with this, we're going to be reviewing a handful of documents that go along with the grant application forms, the requirements therein, as well as the reporting aspects after the awards are granted out, what your organization will need in order to submit and request funds from this grant reward each year. And along the way, we'll be talking about a handful of key components that go into utilizing all of these funds for your senior centers. So first of all, I wanted to talk about a quick overview of the Wyoming Senior Services Board. You may have caught on to some of these concepts in the other modules that have taken place, but the important parts for the grant applications and the grant reporting that makes sense to talk about here are the general makeup of the board. So the Wyoming Senior Services Board consists of 7 voting members and a non-voting member, an ex officio member, and they're all detailed out here as follows. So collectively, this group of appointed members of the board, they meet several times a year to ensure that project dollars are granted out to the approved programs, and they also ensure that policies are updated on an annual basis to ensure that the program is meeting the changing needs of older adults. Now, to go a little bit deeper into this, the board works very closely in consultation with the Aging Division to appropriate the funds that are made available through the state legislature for senior service projects. These funds are then distributed out to eligible senior centers across the state. And one key thing that would focus in on is what makes a senior center eligible to receive funds from the WSSB. So here we have the definition pulled straight from legislation. An eligible senior center must be awarded a Title IIIB support services or a Title IIIC nutrition services grant award under the Older Americans Act. These grants are separate from the grants that the WSSB provides, but they all work towards providing these key services to older adults across the state. So in order to be eligible to receive these funds, you must first be awarded a grant from the Aging Division or and the Older Americans Act programs stated above here. So after you've been determined eligible to receive the WSSB funds, the first part of the funds that go out to every eligible senior center is what we call the basic grant. Now, per statute, every eligible senior center in the state is to receive the same basic grant amount of up to $30,000 annually. This comes from the overall amount that is afforded by the state of Wyoming. Currently, the award amount each year is in the neighborhood of $5 million for these senior service projects. That number is subject to change on a biennial basis based on current state budget and any legislative changes that may happen. But these numbers have stayed pretty solid over the last 10 years, so you can count on that being a consistent level of funding unless there are major changes made. So of that $5 million, we take that first $30,000 and distribute it out to all the senior centers that are eligible to receive the funds. Right now in the state we have 39 eligible centers to receive these funds. So that accounts for the first about $1.1 million of those annual funds. Everything that's left over after we take 1.1 away from the 5 million goes into what we call the formula grant. The formula grant then is reserved and goes out to that network, that same network of senior centers, and 95% of those grant funds are distributed then through a formula basis. This formula is made up primarily of demographic information based on where that eligible senior center is located, how many older adults live within those communities, average number of service units that those senior centers deliver to those eligible participants in their community as well. All of that goes into this formula, and the remaining funds are distributed accordingly to those senior centers based on their demographic need. Combined, the basic grant and the formula grant make up your annual grant award from the WSSB. Those two numbers combined will comprise your overall grant award. So now that you have WSSB funds, you might want to know what these funds are used for. So ultimately, and really the easiest way to find it, it's to meet the demands of Wyoming's growing elderly population. So along with the Title III awards that we mentioned briefly, those grant programs are all aimed at providing unique services to older adults. They can range anywhere from providing transportation to older adults to and from the doctor's appointments. These can be things like nutrition services, either receiving home-delivered meals, congregate setting meals. This can be things like supporting caregivers of older adults in the state. All of these things are services that are unique to seniors in the state of Wyoming. And so these funds are intended to enhance a senior center's ability to provide those services. And it's also to help strengthen the opportunity for seniors to age in the least restrictive environment as possible. What that means is older adults typically have an option when they get to an age where they're needing more care to remain in their communities. They can either choose to go to a nursing home or assisted living type facility, or they can choose to get services in their communities, largely through senior centers. These services help those older adults remain in their homes with being really the least restrictive environment for them, and often their preference. So funds are also intended to be cost effective in the provisions of services to senior citizens, to promote compliance with federal and state mandates requiring placement of people in the least restrictive environments. And what that means is these funds can help senior centers meet federal regulations and mandates that their other programs require that would be more like administrative type costs that could be covered by these types of funds. And really, the funds are intended to enhance or supplement their existing programs. Sometimes it can mean that these dollars can go towards providing services that wouldn't be made available through other grant programs. It really kind of depends on how each senior center is made up and how they choose to request those funds from the Senior Services Board. Alrighty. Now, as we transition after these funds are deemed awarded to your senior center, the first step in obtaining those funds is by completing a WSSB grant application. So each year these grant applications are made available. I believe they typically go out in March each year. That kind of depends on current legislative sessions as well. but typically these grant applications will be made available in March of each year, approved by the board. And they'll be made available on the Aging Division's website. From there, a senior center would download this application form and complete the necessary steps. I'll ask you a number of questions about your center specifically, as well as some basic demographic information and how you intend to utilize the WSSB funds that have been deemed for your center. And from here we can go into some specific examples that we have. We've gone through the process of putting together a quick example of how you enter this information into our application document, and then ultimately how you submit this document to the board for approval. One of the important parts about this application is once you begin this application and have saved and submitted copies to the board for approval, it's extremely important to keep working copies of this document within your organization, so you can fill out the remainder of the year reporting requirements. It's all tied together in this document and linked, so it's very important that you keep these things consistent throughout the year and don't try to make changes to it. So again, just some key reminders about the grant application here. They're updated and released once each year, and that's typically in March. When these are released, the senior centers typically have between 30 and 45 days to complete the application. Again, these time frames vary depending on current legislative sessions and what our turnaround time is to make sure that we can have contracts ready by the start of each fiscal year. Another key note is these applications are approved by the WSSB. The Aging Division assists them in creating the final contracts that go along with these applications. But applications are always approved by the board and their members. So once they're approved, again, the Aging Division will submit the paperwork to the Attorney General's office and complete a formal agreement for your senior center. Right, the next part, after you've completed an application and it's been approved and you have a contract in place with the Aging Division and the WSSB, the next piece is collecting those funds, providing the WSSB with a quarterly invoice report. Now, again, this quarterly invoice will be available on the Aging Division's webpage under the WSSB tab. We've provided a link here for you to click, and you can join us out there and download a copy of this invoice. And we've also provided some detailed examples of how to complete this based on your organization's profit and loss statement. Each senior center provides profit and loss statements a little bit different. Not everyone is the same, but all of them contain the same information and should allow you to complete this document appropriately. So again, important parts about this invoice: once you have completed it, this will be compiled with your quarterly report documentation and submitted to your board representative for their approval. Once they've approved it, they submit the invoice and supporting documentation to the Aging Division to complete a payment voucher, which will coincide with a payment out to your organization. So the big thing to keep in mind with all of these documents as you work to complete them is that you're not alone. If you have any questions about how to complete the documents, or you need any assistance based on what your organization has to submit, you're welcome to call, connect with your board representative. You can call and connect with individuals here at the Aging Division, either myself or we have a couple of other program managers dedicated to assisting with this project. All of us are more than willing to help you get through information get it entered into these documents, and allow you to have successful reporting in order to not delay the processing of those payments for your organization. So we do encourage you at any point, if you get stuck on these documents, to give us a call. We're happy to help. With that, that is all I have for this module. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to working with you all in the future.